Chapter 45 and 46 of The Golden Arrow by Mary Webb. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Anne Erickson, Toronto. Chapter 45. The sense of being reduced to nothing by an unseen force grew on Stephen as he went down the hill. To the gayest heart, the most securely grounded in optimism, fog is deadening, and on a solitary mountainside it is nerve-wracking. To Stephen, with his desperate need of joy, his craving for immortality, and his agonized conviction that no such thing existed, with his desire for someone to worship, and his grey certainty that there was no one, with his lust for clarity and certainty, and his finding of gloom and stark negation, it was an unbearable witness to his worst fears. He wanted, as he could not get free of his desperate spiritual ill, opiates of some kind to deaden it. Here were no opiates, only reality. The mist wreathed about him like seaweed round a derelict ship. It towered above him when the feeble lantern light struck it like prison walls. The dry, dead heather dripped with it. The rich plain, the hills, the blue sky were all dissolved in its colourless uniformity, as this world and the hope of another had dissolved for him. It would be easy to finish it all, here and now, he thought. But he was too near the precipitous side of the hill to think of it long, for he had the healthy young animals shrinking from pain and death. Nor could he face the complete annihilation that death meant for him now, could neither face it, nor believe in it, nor deny it. So he trudged on through the sigh of the heather, brow-beaten, miserable, morose. "'Arf an hour late," said the manager when he arrived, and he said it in the way that always exasperated Stephen, through a yawn during which he played on his teeth with his fingers as on a keyboard. "When I was a young chap," he continued, "I was at work 'arf an hour aforetime, day after day." Stephen looked him over appraisingly. He was a small man and very sensitive about it. "If people's righteous overmuch, it stunts their growth," said Stephen slowly and pleasurably. "If you're late again," said the manager with pent-up hate in his tone, "it's the sack." Stephen made up his mind on the spot to take Pryor's cattle to America. It was the match to a fuse long ready. He said nothing. He was too much occupied with his thoughts of freedom. He loathed the manager, the men, the look of spar. He loathed and despised Lily. He was beginning to hate even the work and the machinery. Had it not been for Deborah, he would have given notice 20 times. Now his nerves snapped. The place had been too much for him in his crisis. In his characteristic way, he wanted to rush off at once, but he must wait for his wage day so as to leave money for Deborah. 3 weeks more, he thought hopelessly, but the end was at least in sight. "Well, best get your coat off and do a bit, now you've been so kind as to come," said the manager. He went off, blandly conscious that he was licking southernwood into shape. All day Stephen pondered. He would get his wages, leave them all with his insurance policy and his savings bank book for Deborah, and go on December 21st to Pryor's, starting for Liverpool that day with or without the cattle. He would send a note to John by Lucy Thruckton, who lived next door to the Pryors, and he would send another to Deborah by a boy. She would be provided for. He could send her nearly all his wages, and if anything happened to him, she would have his insurance. He crushed down the knowledge that this would make no difference to her. He would not remember that material needs are only a secondary thing to some natures, though in his preaching days he had been very fond of the text, "Man doth not live by bread alone." He toiled back at night up the rime-whitened hillside like a gnat on a huge sealed hornet comb. As he came near home, the mist thinned on the hilltop and the moon burned through, ghastly, coppery, huge. She hung above the devil's chair, giving no light, fierce without warmth. Unwholesome in the icy fog she was, compared with the bright, beneficent harvest moon. What a poison gourd is to a melon! It was as if on the barren hill and the unfruitful miasma had sprung an immense living fungus, rotten and worm-eaten, the essence of all the brooding harm that Stephen found in the place. If he stayed here longer, it would be too late, he felt. Even in 3 weeks it might be too late. No, it should not be. He would cling fiercely to sanity now that freedom was so near. If he stayed, he was sure that the result would be the Devil's Gully, the asylum, or one of those horrible nerve-caused double tragedies that are sometimes heard of in lonely places. He breasted the last hill, meeting the rising wind. A few lines now marked his face that had been smooth as a lad's. He looked older, rather thin. The lamp was in the window, the curtains drawn back to show the inside of the kitchen. At the gate stood Deborah, white with cold, but all afire with joy that he was home. "At long last," she murmured. "Oh, lad, dear heart, it's been a weighty while. Come you in and warm you." In her low voice was the essence of all homes, the security that laughs at death. She pulled him in and bolted the door. "Shut in wi' love," she said. The snowberry bush at once began to tap urgently, threateningly. Later, when the wind strengthened, it tapped the window also. From the 3 remaining dead trees and from the acres of heather came through the night a low, long-drawn whimper like the gasping "ah, ah" of a woman in pain. "Half a minute," said Stephen, when the tapping had gone on for some time. He fetched the axe from the woodshed and hacked determinedly at the bush till only a stump remained. "There, that's better." He returned to the fire, his nerves quieter. But now that the tapping was gone, a smaller, weirder sound was audible, the low, thin of the wind in the keyhole. Stephen got up and stuffed paper into it, but the wind whined in the eaves and the window chinks in the chimney, just as if it wants something, or somebody, said Stephen superstitiously. "The way it is hereabouts," said Deborah, "was used to make me glad nights as the cows was safe in shipping and the sheep folded. Father and Mother'll be by the fire now at Upper Leaso's, and Father'll be mixing sheep ointment against lambing time. I expect they miss you." "Aye, joke on and all. You'd rather be with your father than anyone, wouldn't you, Deb?" "I was used to. Now I ne'er want to be along of any but you." Stephen frowned and hastily changed the subject. "I suppose he'll be busy with the lambs soon." "Aye, nights when he was used to be out in the lambing shed I ne'er slept." "Why?" "There wanna no peace. When them you're fond on goes out in the storm, it lets the rainy wind and the hoar frost in. Neither fire nor candles any good then." Stephen began to walk up and down into the scullery and back again, knocking his head every time against the lintel and oblivious of it. "You'm restless, my dear," said Deborah anxiously. "Your poor head'll be all of a bruise. You work too hard. You'm not feeling bad, be you?" "No." "You'd tell me out you felt, wouldn't you, Stephen?" "Of course." "Mind and body, there's no secret atwixt us, be there?" "Oh," said Stephen in an overwrought tone, "damn that wind, damn it!" "There, there," soothed Deborah. "What's the wind?" "Nowt. It met cry and cry, but it canna get in nor yet do nowt again us. There's no door ajar in our two lives to let un in. We'm shut in with love, like I was used to be under the sainty tree in June. We call it golden showers about our way from the shine of it. We'm got our own sainty tree now, you and me." Stephen quickened his step. "For the Lord's sake, stop!" he broke out. Deborah looked at him anxiously. "Stephen, lad," she said, "you'm not heart well?" He laughed suddenly, tragically. "Oh, I am never better," he said. "Well then, Stephen, there's no call to stamp about when you'm trudged all day, and bang your poor head as is the comeliest in the world. Give o'er tramping, and let me stroke your hair." His head ached, his throat was parched. He flung himself down and rested his head in her lap. He began to pull bits out of the rag hearth rug, a present from Mrs. Arden with good luck in red flannel on a green background. "There, now rest you," said Deborah, more radiantly happy than ever in her life before, since she was tending him and he was depending on her. "Now you're my little lad," she said, smiling archly, "for all your maester in ways." She ran her fingers through his hair. "It wasna for nowt as I found one of God Almighty's lady cows on my gown the day I saw you first," she went on, "for they token golden luck, and you're a golden lad, and you've brought me luck and no mistake." He was silent, striving not to see the tragic irony of all she said. "In the old tale of the arrow," she said, "there's a mort of old ancient women as come in, and they say, 'Acorns for the pig, faggots for the fire, but we missed summat.' And in a while the lovers come in, triumphing like, and say they've missed nowt, and no more have we." He turned restlessly. "Stroke more," he said imperiously, "and sing, don't talk." She began to sing in a hushed voice while the firelight stole up and down the walls, and the wind lashed itself into the yelping fury of starved hounds. We have sought the golden arrow, bright the sally willows sway, two and two by paths slow and narrow, arm and crook along the mountain way. Break a frost and break a day, some were sobbing through the gloom, when we found the golden arrow, wand of willow in the secret gloom. She looked down in the silence afterwards. He was asleep. She took up the small woolen boots. She would be doing them when he awoke, and he would ask what they were. She smiled. I know right well what he'll say, she thought. He'll say, What the devil are those doll's leggings? For he always calls my stockings leggings and my nightgown a shirt, him being such a manly chap, and nothing of the human in him, thank goodness. She crocheted in a maze of delight at this thought and at the prospect of telling him her news. But when Stephen awoke, he only wanted to go to bed and never noticed the boots. It is the tragedy of the self-absorbed that when the great moments of their lives go by in royal raiment with the sound of silver flutes, they are so muffled in self and the present that they neither hear nor see. Chapter 46. St. Thomas' Day, like a mildewed rose, died before it flowered. In the dark morning Stephen looked at Deborah's sleeping face in the candlelight, and wavered in his resolve. Snow was falling. The flakes flattened themselves like soft berries flung against the panes. In the curious mock daylight which even a light fall of snow gives to a morning, Stephen could see the chair looming coal-black on the east. It stood against grim white clouds through whose impenetrable layers the sun would never rise today. Snow was a new variation of the capacity of this country for wintry gloom. Stephen hated its aspect even more than the fog. It lay deep and inscrutable over gaunt hill and dimpled meadow. It took away the beauty and the cruelty of the land, leaving mere sterility. It had come softly in the dark, like a lingering death. Only in the sky a few frail colors bloomed, the sole emblems of vitality in a dead world. They were delicate and alluring as the desire of youth for youth, of a clear soul for God. Stephen gazed at them, finding them friendly in a world of animosity, and longed to follow them beyond the horizon. His resolve was stronger than before. In the last 3 weeks he had been hard-pressed by despair, and had sunk into gloom and morose bad temper. Now the day of the breaking of all chains had come for him. At this moment the cattle-boat would be in the Mersey. Life had a glow again. He did not know that this was only a false dawn, that the new world would be as dark and haunted as the old, until he conquered or went under. Should he go while Deborah was asleep? He thought not. He would not deny her or himself the last kiss. Not that he regarded the parting as final. In a vague way he thought of coming to fetch her sometime, when he had made a new home. He did not know at this time that a lover would sooner lie in the hedge-bank than be left alone while the most splendid home is built, since the first alternative is life, and the second death. Deb, he said, waking her with a kiss. Some timeless sorrow had brooded on her sleep. She woke to a smile with the air of a frightened child. Out of her half-dreaming state she looked up dazedly and said, with the strange unconscious voicing of fate to which human beings are sometimes doomed, "The longest night be come." Stephen hurried over breakfast, a feverish flush on his cheeks, a horror of what he was doing in his heart. He was afraid that Deborah might say one of those heart-wringing things that she did say at times, and so foil his purpose after all. She wondered at the wildness of his kisses when he left her, at the way he turned round so often. Lately he had forgotten to turn at all, and waved his hand. Then he disappeared in the wondering snowflakes, and she turned back with a lagging step. It was 4 o'clock when a small boy from Lost Women came up the path with Stephen's note, and Deborah's heart seemed to stop. She ran to the door. "Not hurted!" she cried. "He's not hurted! Quick! Quick!" She shook the boy. "What am you after shaking me?" he said, dodging her. "Is who hurted?" "The foreman, my man, Southernwood." "Hurted? No, he give me this to give you." "You'm sure he's all right?" "Didn't I say so?" "Would you like an apple?" So she rewarded with the best she had the messenger of horror, as one might bring out wine and delicate fare for the Black Reaper himself. The boy ran off, and Deborah opened the letter. Dearest Deborah, I am obliged to go away. Have asked your father to come for you and take you home. Forgive me. Stephen. She did not faint. Her only sensation was one of surprise that she was not dead. Hour after hour dragged by. The letter was burnt into her brain. Still she was not dead, she thought. Obliged to go away. She knew that was not true. Nothing could make him go unless he wanted to, and above all, not alone. Have asked your father to come and take you home. But Stephen was home. Forgive me. Forgive what? She could not be forgiving or unforgiving, angry or loving, cold or passionate. She could never be anything any more. Stephen. She stood where she had opened the letter, incapable of any motion, for a long time, and she continued with dazed pauses to say over and over in every tone of love, Stephen, Stephen. Yet she had not realized anything. When 5 o'clock struck, she suddenly said, His tea! And ran to relight the fire. Then she looked at the letter, and slowly as the massing of thunderclouds for a storm that will devastate the plain, or the first glissade of rock for a landslip that will sweep away a mountainside, the real meaning of it began to come upon her. Stephen did not love her. It was perfectly dark. The cottage was hushed as a tomb. A mouse began to nibble in the wainscot. The wind moaned and blew eddies of snow in at the open door. Stephen did not love her. The finality of this she never questioned. Something akin to hers might be the emotions of a Teresa confronted with incontrovertible proof that Christ never lived, or of a mother not yet free from the pains of childbirth, told that her baby is dead. She looked round. All was pitch dark, but she saw with agonizing vividness scene after scene of her life with Stephen. Again the weary surprise came on her that she was not dead. She groped for matches, thinking, I be in a nightmare. I'll wake afore long. She lit the candle. Neither lamp nor candle, she muttered, after this. Then she went upstairs and brought down an armful of letters and Stephen's clothes. None met see, none met know, none met set hand on 'em, she murmured. For the priest will burn his church and his sacred chalice rather than that the holy things, which have grown mysterious with darting light from beyond the horizon, should fall into bestial hands. All hands that were not Stephen seemed bestial to Deborah now, with the sense that life being over, things must be put away. As one tidies a room at night, she went on carrying out the chairs, the crockery, her sewing machine, everything, until her back ached, though she did not know it. The snow thickened. She went to and fro, enlarging the pile outside the door. The longest night is come, she said. The wind raved in the pinnacles of the chair, shrieked in the dry heather, threatened the dead trees, tore at her dress, blew down a picture from the wall with a crash of glass. Deborah was dragging out the little oak table when suddenly Nancy Cora stood in the doorway. A queer night to be out, she grumbled. I was at last within along of a young woman that's bad, and now I dursn't go home in such weather. Met I bide in your kitchen tonight. At the word bide, Deborah had a vision out of the glinting past. She stood and smiled at Nancy with such exquisite sweetness that Nancy was taken aback. You'm very kindly welcome, she said, to bide with me. Whatever be you doing? Asked Nancy. What's that bonfire? Give me a hand with the dresser, said Deborah. It suddenly came to Nancy, as she saw of what the bonfire was composed, and looked at Deborah's face, that she was with a madwoman. She stole away while Deborah's back was turned. No, said Deborah, you mun help me. Nancy was obliged to come back. They went on carrying out the furniture in the blinding snow. At intervals it was fine. A powder of stars came out over the devil's chair. The longest night be come, said Deborah. Aye, no doubt, replied Nancy slavishly. And all the ghosts in Shropshire are coming here to choose 'em a king. Aye, it's snowing bad, Nancy answered, anxious to keep off ghosts. Now bring the mangle. Deborah caught her arm. Nancy shrieked. Did you hear that devil yonder? Deborah said. In the little copy it was. Oh, done it, cried Nancy in a cold sweat. Playing bo-peep along of another by their voices, said Deborah. But there's no leaves now for 'em to hide in. Now but dead leaves now, like little blind mice on the tree. Little blind mice, there. Dinna you hear that? How dear, how dear. She sang the words as a wagoner sings them, high on the first, with a fall on the second. Lugging stones they be, she added, for the devil's chair. It's only the wind, said Nancy. Only the wind, my dear. Hearken now, cried Deborah. There's another. A-whoop! That's what he said. And there go the dark riders. Nancy, torn between fear and greed, managed to conceal some spoons in her apron. Now, you come down along of me, my dear, she pleaded, despairing of getting away alone, and see what a nice cup of tea I'll get you. There's a child crying up at the chair, said Deborah. They'm strangling it. It's only the wind, Nancy reiterated. It's a love child, said Deborah. Hark at them, all the devils shouting, Come by chance, come by chance. But yours winna be a love child, said Nancy. You married all right and proper now. Left, moaned Deborah, with depths of unplumbed agony in her voice. Suddenly she began to sing. Oh, where is my lad tonight? If I ever get out of this, said Nancy privately to the hodgepodge of malice and might which was her conception of God, I'll give up the paying job. They're strangling that child. Hark at him shrieking, said Deborah. I hear nowt. Canna you hear the ghost shuffling and whispering soft-like? You come down, Deb Southernwood. Never no more, never no more. Look'ee, Nancy implored, feeling desperate. Let's be going. It's an awful night. Aye, a night to lose sheep on. Deborah fetched out paper and stuffed it round the base of the bonfire. You munna light it, cried Nancy, stirred by such waste of good furniture, though not concerned at the waste of a soul. Whatever'll your husband say? I be no wife, a kept 'oman. What? I thought you was married. Stephen, Deborah explained, and at his name she was shaken with long, terrible tremors. Stephen dunna love me. This reasoning was beyond Nancy. Acorns for the pig, faggots for the fire, murmured Deborah, but we missed summat. She began to sing the Golden Arrow. Some were sobbing through the gloom, when we found the golden arrow. Wander willow in the secret coombe. Nancy, frozen with terror, listened to the ghastly music. Deborah stood gazing into vacancy. Shut in with love, she whispered, and then hoarsely and without emotion, Gone, gone, gone for evermore. The things were all brought out. The house was bare, cold, awful. Outside, towering up with a little cap of snow, was the pile of furniture. Deborah looked straight before her. Do you love me true, Stephen Southernwood? She asked. Do you love me so bad that you am lost without me? Are you certain sure? Then I'll be the love of your life while life lasts, and your mate till I lie in the daisies. She turned to Nancy. They've chose their king. Hark at him, she said, him in the chair. The flockmaster's dead. Hark at the devils laughing, and hark at that voice full of trouble and trembling. The thorn blows late. It's only an owl, asseverated Nancy. Well, good night to you, said Deborah. I'm going to light it now. What a wicked waste! He'll come back and want the things. Never no more, said Deborah. Where be you going when you've lit it? Asked Nancy, in order to take care to go the other way. The other side of silence. What softness! Why not stop the child being born and go free? What child? Why, yours that's coming, yours in Southernwoods. The swift destruction that had been going on in Deborah's brain was arrested for a moment. He was gone. He did not want her, but she could still bear his child. Summat to do for Stephen, she whispered. She advanced on Nancy with fury in her eyes. I'll learn you to try and rob me, you thief, she cried. Nancy fled, dropping the spoons. 'Twas only 3, and there they are, she said. But Deborah had identified her with the fate that had thieved her all. It was well for Nancy that she fled. Deborah poured paraffin on the fire and struck a match. From the bitter loneliness on every side came shrieks, sighs, bellowings, threats as the wind rose and fell. The air was full of snow, driving, whirling, and what with its eddying round the chair and the falling of stones and the strange sounds as of laughter and sorrow that came thence, it seemed as if the old tales were true and the ghosts had indeed come in like a tide. The fire blazed up. Deborah watched it. "The kindly light," she said. "God help all poor folk benighted. God keep Stephen, for I canna. She rocked in the agony of the thought that she did not know where he was, that she could do and be nothing more for him. No living creature stirred in the waste but the two women, one running over the ridges, hounded by fear, the other beyond all fear, having suffered till feeling snapped. Stephen, turning into his berth, tired after a busy day, had no inkling that his rather cursory preparation for her welfare had been brushed aside by circumstances. Beyond the Wilder Hope range at Wood's End, Lucy Thruckton snored. She had, in her usual ponderous manner, failed to get under way with Stephen's letter to John until very late, and had then turned back, afraid. "'Twill do as well tomorrow day," she said, and did not know that on her flat-footed movements 2 lives might depend. At High Leaso's, John lit Deborah's lamp, as usual. As usual, Patty scolded. They went to bed, and as on every other night, John prayed, kneeling at the old knobby chair in the window, for those he loved, adding, as always, with a swift feeling of selfishness, "and all other poor folk." He gazed out through a small clear space in the frosted window-pane. "May love bless 'em all and keep 'em all," he concluded, "now and forever after." He was unaware that his own love, his little lamp, was the one thing between Deborah and death. Above Lost Withen, the fire licked the black night with red forked tongues until a glare lit the brooding sky. Down in the plain, women who were awake late shook with fear and woke someone to keep them company. "The devil's chair's burning," they whispered. "Maybe it's the end of the world." Still Deborah stood and watched the fire until it began to pale. Then such a horror of loneliness came upon her that she ran, stumbling, away from the place. She was too worn and numb to reason any more. She had no purpose left, either to live or die. She had even forgotten Stephen's child. Blindly as the bird over the seas she went, sometimes falling, always without consciousness of direction, down the hill on the Wilder Hope side, through the black woods, along lonely lanes to the foot of the Wilder Hope range. "The kindly light," she said with a gasp as she began to climb. Hours passed. Slowly and with growing feebleness she went on. She reached the farthest gate where John had been to send her on the day when she went away with Stephen. She reached the second gate and saw, small and softly bright in the infinite blackness of the night, the light of the lamp shining through the open door of her old room and through the uncurtained window. John, coming down at 5 to attend to the cow with the hoost, found Deborah on the doorstep, unconscious. End of chapter 46. Chapter 47 and 48 of The Golden Arrow by Mary Webb. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Anne Erickson, Toronto. Chapter 47. It was Christmas Eve. Joe and Lily were coming to tea tomorrow. Mrs. Arden had ordained that Deborah must be took out of herself. She had lain in a state of semi-coma since the black night on which she came home. Sometimes she called for Stephen with low, terrible iteration. Only John's presence seemed to make an atmosphere of partial peace around her. He sat by her hour by hour, silent, breathing out love. In his eyes lay the anguish of a great lover confronted with pain that he cannot cure. Mrs. Arden was wildly, concealedly jealous. She had not hitherto loved Deborah nearly so much as Joe. The fraying of feminine on feminine in daily life often has this effect on mothers and daughters. But if a cataclysm comes, as it had in Deborah's life, reality comes to the top. Mrs. Arden loved Deborah now with complete self-abnegation, and with jealous devotion that such love brings. She slaved from morning till night, and whenever she saw, or thought she saw, that John's silent presence was more valued than all her labors, she cried with her loud, hiccuping sobs away at the end of the garden by the rhubarb. Then she would return and give the patient John a bit of her mind, at all times and places, except in Deborah's room, to John or to Joe, to Rover if they were absent, to the clock or the bird cups if Rover refused to wake up. She raged at the absent Stephen. The household furniture became his whipping boy. The clothes in the tub, the hens round the door, suffered vicariously for him. "You nasty blackguard!" she apostrophized Rover one day, shaking the dolly at him so ferociously that he ran whimpering from the kitchen and never stopped till he reached the end of the Liso's pastures, while the sheep bunched and regarded their awful deity in this new guise with prim satire. When Eli looked in on the morning of Christmas Eve to ask John's help with some ewes, she turned a wrathful face on him. "Dinna come prying here," she said. "It's all your fault." "What is?" "You know right well, and if I had him here I'd tear him inchmeal, so I would." "Who?" "Glad enough you'll be, for you smell out trouble like a blowfly smells a carcass, and you'd liefer see tears than beer." "Well, cough it up, woman. Let's hear the worst. In the hand of the Lord there is a cup." "In your ears there'll be a singing if you dunna stop your texes," said Paddy. "I canna hear myself speak." John came down to stop the tumult in his stocking feet. "Well, a happy Christmas, John," said Eli. "Leastways a righteous and repentant un, and some wadding for your ears. Who's dead? Cow with the hoost?" "There is none dead, by the mercy of him whose name is Love, but my poor girl's in sore trouble." "Eh?" "She am laying only just outside the shadowy gate, and it's quiet feet and soft voices, and a hand in the dark for us in this house." "Cottage," said Eli mechanically. "What ails the wench?" "She's a lusty, strapping young woman enough." "Eli," said John, "though 65 summers and winters have gone o'er you, they've not learnt you as there's ills beyond the ills of the poor flesh, that turn the heart to water, aye, and make life a bit of a trampled berry. When love's cut, we drop down from God." "To hear a man of your age talking of love's disgusting," said Eli. "No wonder you're poor in this life, and'll be poorer in the next, for you've nowt but flimsy words, and no eye to business neither in cows nor religion. What's took the girl, as you're so beside yourselves?" "Stephen's left her." "Didn't I say so? Didn't I say he was a gallous young scoundrel? He took my Bible and miscalled me. He's got no fear of God in him, nor the devil, nor yet me. Well, good riddance, so long as he left her the cottage and furniture." "Money's nowt and bread's nowt when the heart's dying, Eli, and she's burnt the furniture." "Burnt the furniture! The new chairs and the table has had a good market value. What a wicked woman!" John looked at him with pitiful scorn. "Chairs and tables and all such," he said, waving his hand, "is for use in the meetings and partings of man, and the hills is for man to climb, and the stars to light him upwards. But ne'er a one of 'em is aught to do with man hisself, for the end of man's life is love, to give it and take it, and if he dunna, he might as well be dead." "Well, burn my ricks if you bin a mad, John, gobbling love, love, love like a crazy turkey." "God is love, Eli." John turned on his heel. "Well, you might as well come and love my sheep a bit," said Eli, "for they've got foot rot, and it takes two to dress 'em." "When Deborah's better, I'll come." "Not afore?" "No." "Well, I'm surprised at you. Selfish to the bone. Their market value's going down every day." "Dear sakes!" John was as near to exasperation as he ever was. "You talk as if the world was naught but pounds, shillings, and pence." "So it is, and the sharpest gets 'em." "I'd liefer lose 'em." "Well, that you surely will, leaf or no," said Eli as he stumped out. Meanwhile, Patty had seized the opportunity to steal up to Deborah's room and ensconce herself with much creaking in John's chair by the bed, with the Bible he had been reading on her lap, and a pathetic imitation of his contemplative attitude. But stillness was unnatural to her, and to read the Bible on working days was, as she put it, against the grain. So she began to amuse herself by fortune-telling with the Bible, by letting it fall open and putting her finger on a text with her eyes shut. The sudden little slap and wrestle at regular intervals awoke Deborah from her uneasy doze and wearied her exhausted nerves. Mrs. Arden had no idea of the fact. When John came back, she said, "Now, dinna come disturbing her. I'm sitting with her." "There's a bit of a smell in the kitchen, as if summat in the oven might be catched," said John. "Laws me!" She let the Bible fall. "It's the mince pies." John sat down calmly and went on reading from where he left off. The feverish flush on Deborah's face slowly subsided. In an hour she was asleep again. Fidge in her room from morning to night," said Mrs. Arden to Lily next day. "She'll ne'er get right if you dinna give me a chance to nurse her." Neither she nor Lily knew that to some natures all the conventional precautions are so much poison, and only the strong invisible tendance of the spiritual, the unpractical, unscientific, is of any use at all. For there are times when it is not the deft hand, the skilled brain, the accumulated knowledge of centuries that can bring a human being back from the dark, but only the unskilled hand of a lover, the timeless gaze, the care that knows nothing of precaution or precedent. The room sank deeper into quiet. Deborah slipped from her waking numbness into complete oblivion. The darkness thickened. John sat pondering for the 100th time as to what could have made Stephen go. He looked daily for the postmaster from Sleep, who was also the grocer, and who received the letters from an auxiliary, who in turn received them from an old man with a broad gold band round his hat and a faithful VR on the back of his cart. But when the postmaster came, looking as he toiled up the snowy valley, like a fly in a sugar scoop full of fine white sugar, he only brought a Christmas card from Lucy Thruckton. Suddenly the grey peace of the room was rent by shrill children's voices singing outside in the cold air. It was the Shakeshaft children. They are an embodiment of the urgent life of the world, which will seek joy, no matter who lies dying. John crept to the window. "Do you little uns know Lead Kindly Light?" "Aye, eastaways a verse and a bit." "Well, you sing that then, my dears, for nights be dark." The three little voices sang with unruffled blitheness the frantic appeal out of a gloom of which they had never dreamt. Deborah awoke into the pathos of it, and wished that her father's light and the faint remembrance of the hymn had not brought her home. She would never have the courage now to walk out of her father's ken into Lost Withen Pool. That night she could have done it. She felt that the lamp on the stairs had been treacherous to her, taking advantage of her exhaustion to undermine her resolve. Now the future rose before her like the black rocks of Lost Withen. She remembered how the cranberry flowers had looked like tears when she was listening to the rock crusher on that day in August. She had no tears now. Stephen made no more demands on her. With the wild self-reproach of generous natures, she thought that she had been cold and selfish. It was agony to remember any moments but those few in which she felt that she really had given him all she could. Any thought spent on others seemed to her now a crime. It had been dreadful to her not to know how he was faring down at the mine. The present complete silence left her mind a blank. The children galloped through the hymn and finished off with a rush, and lost a while "A Merry Christmas!" Something in the hymn's merciful way of treating loss as merely finite, recovery as infinite, brought the long-frozen tears to Deborah. It was not that she definitely expected anything. She did not. For even if Stephen came back, now that she was sure he did not love her, living together would be worse than nothing. Yet the optimism of the hymn was sweet after the iron horror of that black night above Lost Withen. "Father," she said suddenly, "can I have the map of the world?" "A map, my dear?" "Aye, the old schoolin' as Joe and me learnt on." John went down to look for it, and found Patty giving the children mince pies. "Not as you learned them," she remarked, "for a more miserable vexatious ditty than that there yearning thing I ne'er listened at on Christmas Eve. You was used to sing pretty things like 'I saw 3 ships.' Sing it now, loud, and not stand creaking like turkey poults in the rain." "Not the ships," said John. Mrs. Arden was inarticulate with rage. "Well," she said at last, "to think as I've worked and scratted and saved and bore you 2 chillun, and now you up and say in my own kitchen as I munna hear talk of my favourite carol." "Stephen's gone in a ship." "Stephen, I'm fair sick of the name. I can understand right well now them old fellows has stoned that Stephen in the Bible,
By the way you din about him, he might be someone as died respectable and left money instead of enjoying himself among the buffaloes. And all along of him I cannot hear a bit of heartening song from children as I give their first wash to all three." "There," said John, "tomorrow we'll have 2-3 carols, mother." "Is Deb awake?" "Aye." "Why didn't you tell me? There's her broth been ready this hour. A more forgetful man I never see. Forget to eat, forget to sleep. If it had depended on you, you'd have forgotten to be born." She disappeared upstairs, making the most of her practical qualities, since John had all the others. John fetched in the holly and began to arrange it round the pictures as a little surprise for her. Then he sat down to lap up his Christmas presents in various bits of ornamental paper saved during the year, fastening them with some copper wire that he had by him, and writing on them after long, pleasant cogitation. Chapter 48. Faint tinklings, quick and small as a robin's chink, chink, came up the dark slopes above Sleep on Christmas evening. The handbell ringers were coming Christmasing, as they did every year when the weather allowed them. Joe and Lily had just arrived, and they were all having tea, Deborah apart in an armchair by the fire, withdrawn in heavy unconsciousness. She had got up at John's entreaty. It had taken her hours to dress, so hard was it to fix her attention on anything, and once downstairs she sank again into stupor. Joe, not having seen her since her illness, tiptoed across the kitchen with the air of a hopscotch player and a great scratching of hobnails on tiles. "When you'm quiet, Joe, you make more noise than when you'm noisy," said Mrs. Arden. "Well, Deb," said Joe, in the ventriloquist whisper that he kept for invalids and the amens in chapel, "how be you?" "I be all right," Deborah spoke slowly. "I quite all right." "Our Deb's a good Pluckton," said John, with tears in his eyes. Lily kissed Deborah. "Well, Deb," she said in the rather patronizing tone that she used to the sick or unfortunate, "I hope you'll soon be well." "Aye, soon be well," said Deborah, without raising her eyes. Joe sat regarding her with awe. What had come over her to make her a stranger to him? She was only our Deb, a good sister and pleasant-spoken, but nothing out of the common. He was puzzled by her remoteness, her dignity. For the clammis of grief, though it does not create, brings out hidden greatness. Deborah, in her silence, her unalterable grief, her tragedy, which to many would have been no tragedy, had the bearing and presence of a queen of some vast, unknown land. "Damn his eyes!" said Joe suddenly with passion, banging his closed hand on the table till the cups rattled, and quite forgetting his invalid manner. Mrs. Arden opened her mouth for a reproof, but realizing who he meant, she remarked instead, "I says the same." "Well, mother," said John. "I wish, if you must swear, Joe," complained Lily, "you'd swear genteel." "Damn who, Joe?" asked Deborah, coming halfway out of her reverie. Joe was, to use his own expression, put about. He stared helplessly at Deborah. "Damn who?" she repeated in level tones. At this moment a tinkle was heard outside. "It's the Sleep handbells!" cried Lily. "What a treat!" Handbells and such festivities had never come to Bitterly. Joe welcomed the diversion. "Aye, there they come," he said, "Cadwallader and all." "Damn who?" said Deborah. "Best say summat, Joe," murmured John anxiously. "Cadwallader, Deb," said Joe. "Damn Cadwallader and his missus and his kid," he repeated, with great relief at having found a lamb for the sacrifice. Deborah went back into her stillness. The gate clicked and John went to the door. "Well, neighbours," he said, "you're kindly welcome. What am you going to give us?" The postmaster, as head of the band and bass bell, said he thought of ox and ass, which everyone knew to mean "Good Christian men rejoice," though why the ringers always named it after a line in the second verse no one asked. "And a very suitable un," said Mrs. Arden, "for if we anna got an ox, we'n 2 cows, and our Joe's an ass if ever there was one." When the merriment subsided, they grouped themselves in a semicircle, Job Cadwallader having been urgently entreated to come in at the right moment and not half a note too late, as he always did. The postmaster cleared his throat and said in the tone of one inciting a mob to evil doing, "The chime." Obediently, under the large stars on their black velvet, the chime of 8 bells rippled out, with one dotted note occasioned by Job. "You did it again," said the postmaster in a grieved voice. "I did me best," said Job, "but when I'm expectin' him to waggle, he dunna, and as soon as I've give up expectin', he does it sudden like." "You're not master of your bell," said Shake Shaft solemnly. "Cowiller ain't master of his missus nor hisself, so it ain't likely he be master of anythink as determined as a bell," said the blacksmith, who had taken a good deal of refreshment. "If you'm Christmas pert when you'm only done the parsons and the squires and 2 more, what'll you be when we'm through?" asked the postmaster. The blacksmith subsided. "Now, the chime again, and into the hymn right off." The antique tune, sweetly and emphatically uttered by the bells, slipped out o'er the great plateau, pearl-tinted in the light of stars and the rising moon. The sense of the words was in the air. They were so well known by all, and they brought the strange joy with which some old Christian hymns touch the human heart, a joy alien to those here, and to most human beings, who are pagan at the core. Even John's Christianity was earthy, fuller flavored than any formulated creed can be, but perhaps not fuller flavored or as natural or as rich as the gospel story, if we knew it in its entirety. This was John's favorite carol because it brought in the animal world. "Ox and ass before him bow. Aye," he murmured, "the dumb things know." Mrs. Arden tapped her foot to the tune and found no trial of faith in the words, for every birth to her was wondrous, and she was only a little less thrilled by the coming of this marvel 2,000 years ago than by the coming of a neighbor's child tonight. Lily rocked idly in the old rocking chair. If her rather vague and muddled ideas could have been unravelled, they would have resolved themselves into a kind of pity for a woman who had the pains of maternity without the ameliorations of wifehood. Joe sat contentedly drinking in the picture of childhood and cattle and mangers, for these were things he knew, friendly and homely, but there was not in him or in any of those present the sense of sinfulness implied in the carol, for that sense is an artificial product of civilization, and though it may be both beautiful and necessary in some environments, it is not so among simple people living normal lives. "What a dot and go one chap you are, Job," said the postmaster. "What ails you hopping on the note like that?" "I done my best," said Job. "I fixed my eye on the clapper 3 bells afore my note, and I puts me tongue out, and I thought I should catchen him, but I didna. Belike I will sometime." "When bit-bats sleep heads upward and women sleep alone," piped a small man who rang the treble bell. He was dapper as a robin and wore a perpetual smile as if he had thought of a splendid joke in babyhood and had never yet told it. He was the wit of the party. There was much mirth and covering of large mouths with large hands at his remarks. "Will," said the tenor bell, who was parish clerk, "such speaking's not convenient." "Nor yet sleeping alone, bain't," said the blacksmith, who had an enormous voice, which gave to his remarks, all broad in humour, a kind of shamelessness. "Now, now," said the postmaster, finding his flock rather unruly. "Manners afore ladies, men. We'll play as Joseph was a-walking." Afterwards John asked for "Lead, kindly light," with a sorrowful glance at the silent figure by the fire. "Oh, laws me," said Patty, "that gloomy thing again. What a man! What do we want with encircling gloom and angels' faces when we're just going to sit down to Christmas beef and pickle?" "And beer," said the blacksmith outside in tones that would have been persuasive if they had not been stentorian. "Ringing first," said the leader firmly. They played, and Deborah sat with the map on her knee. She had drawn a line from Liverpool to New York across the Atlantic, but no pencil line nor anything else, letters, cables, photos, can soften the tragedy of distance. She had suffered so much that she was numb, as people are after intense physical pain. She looked worn, but this added to her beauty, for the spirit shone more clearly. The younger men among the ringers, looking into the mellow firelight of the room and seeing her there, aloof from the rest, beautiful and silent, thought Stephen a great fool. They also, seeing Lily's sunflower of a head going to and fro in the rocking chair, thought Joe a lucky man, which thought Lily divined, and smiled intoxicatingly at them all. "Well, thank you kindly," said John at the end. "And now come you all in and have a drop and some pies." They came in, shuffling, broadly smiling. The blacksmith was in high feather. "Well, Joe," he shouted, "what's 1 and 1 make?" "Too, what a soft riddle," said Joe. "Read!" roared the blacksmith with depths of meaning, and the less discreet laughed. "Very mild for the season," said the postmaster to cover this remark. "A mild dropping time." "I thought it was a black frost," said Deborah, in a low, desolate voice. "A long black frost." Everyone in the room grew still. A kind of fear gripped them. Mrs. Arden wiped her eyes. Joe stared at his boots. Lily looked impatiently at Deborah, angry with her for dimming the revelry. The ringer stood with mugs and pies suspended. John put down the rug he was carrying and went over to her. "In the black frosses," he said, "there's green and reds down under, and summer in the making." He sat down by her and stroked her arm gently. "I hear tell," said Cadwallader, who was not noted for tact, and who had been following a train of thought, "as they're all 6s and 7s at the mine since he's gone. The manager canna get the man in hand no more'n a babby. He'd got away with him, they say, though he was young, and they dursn't go again him. What are you treading on my foot for so heavy, Mr. Shakeshaft?" Deborah turned to Job with the first faint look of interest that she had worn since the 21st. "All 6s and 7s be they," she said with pride. "Aye, missus," said Job, taken aback. "Can I get on without him?" she asked eagerly. "No danger, missus." "Aye," she said, with such a fire of love in her eyes that the men watched her open-mouthed. "Aye, they'll miss him. They'll not find his like. Not in all the world can they find the like of my Stephen." It was the first time she had said his name. She was immediately overcome with such terrible weeping that Mrs. Arden was alarmed and helped her upstairs. The blacksmith, tears rolling down his cheeks, advanced in boxing style upon poor Job. "I'll gie ye a black eye for tar mention of her," he shouted, in a bass voice which was rather spoilt by its unsteadiness. "I didna," Job repeated. "I only said—" "Listen at him! Only said!" "Now, Jim," the postmaster interposed, shooing his ringers out as he would shoe fowls. "Good night, all," said John. "Dunna take on, Job, for tears is a balm." The ringers disappeared, scattering faint silvery tinklings that fell in the night like drops of water. Through them could be heard the blacksmith's infuriated bellowings. End of chapter 48. Chapter 49 and 50 of The Golden Arrow by Mary Webb. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Anne Erickson, Toronto. Chapter 49. After a January of blinding snow and almost unbroken frost, February came with the first minute white points of snowdrops pricking through the soil of the warm valley gardens. It was lambing time, and John was busy night and day with his flock, often sitting up till dawn in the fold house where the sheep were. Deborah would stand at her dark window on the nights when she could not sleep and watch his lantern, an old-fashioned octagonal one with horn sides, dance to and fro across the fold like a dependable will-o'-the-wisp when he came and went to the house, fetching oil or bringing a lamb to warm by the fire. It comforted her as the sense of a watcher comforts a sick man, as vivid faith in God comforts the dying. She was sick with a great self-weariness. She wanted Stephen and had only herself. She had lived outside her own personality, and now to be sent back into it was like returning to some small village after traveling across the world. She was paralyzed in emotion, her heart slowly dying. On her face began the subtle misting over of expression that ends in a look of torpor and means stagnation of soul. On the nights when sleet drove like a tide against the small-lidded panes of her window, she would look across the fold at the yellow, homely glow of the unglazed window behind which her father dozed or tended the lambs. He was her one link with sanity. For him she still had some living love, which had somehow survived the desolation of her life. When the unanswerable questions, "Where is he? Why doesn't he write?" came upon her more urgently than usual, and her love groped in the darkness of ignorance for some small clue of her beloved, when the thousand ills that might befall him came on her with sickening agony, and the deadly remembrance that she would not be near him, could not get to him, whatever might happen, however he might want her, tried her almost to madness. Then she would follow John about, pitiful in her purposeless existence as the young lambs that bore her company. And John, with his tall, bent figure, his clear, noble profile and far-seeing eyes, became to her in these benighted months a symbol of the flock-master who understood all and healed all. As he went to and fro on his daily duties, impeded at every step by the small creatures that loved him, followed silently by Rover, hilariously by the hens, wistfully by the ewes that still waited their hour, importantly by those that were shadowed by one or two black-faced, black-legged lambs, he soothed her by his endless patience, his large humour that had room for all. He could not cure her nor take away any of her pain, but he could strengthen her by the beauty of his personality, as the hand of someone deeply loved can help those in physical agony. Mrs. Arden, looking sometimes from the kitchen window, bright with pink and red geraniums, would stamp with jealousy at seeing Deborah following him all day, and herself not needed. Then, in a revulsion of feeling, she would wipe away the tears and say, "Well, he deserves it, and I dunna. To see him now, all clustered up with a throng of lambs and fowl, and them soft ducks, and Rover as is getting softening of the brain, not to speak of the cows and pigs and ewes as ought to know better, and he never kicks one of 'em, though he's forced to go like walking on eggs, and as slow as a tortoise's funeral." Then she would go to the door and shriek across the yard that tea was nearly ready, and go in again to concoct some dainty. On a night towards the end of February, with a sharp frost, she called them across the darkening yard. "Coming, mother," cried John. "Always coming you are, like summer butter, and never come," replied his wife with asperity, for cold nights catched her chest, as she put it, and she was sorrowful for Deborah, and felt the bitterness of those who desire to comfort and have no skill in it. In the west there was still a red gash that stained the dusky tops of the shippen and the house and the shed at the back with reflected light. A scent of hay came from the little stack on the sharp air, with the warm smell from the shippen where John had just finished milking. A blackbird craked from the small kitchen garden where he had found a warm roosting place, and was settling for the night. In the shed the sheep stirred and stamped. Whitefoot pulled down hay from his crotch and chumbled it contentedly. The small world of creatures under John's care was at peace. Within, against the close-drawn blind and the shutters, the geraniums stood up fresh and bright in their brick-red pots. The furniture shone, the tiles glowed, and above the crackling wood fire bubbled the usual saucepan of potatoes. Tea was laid, and Mrs. Arden took up her knitting till John and Deborah should come in. She was making socks for the two newcomers into the family. She made socks for all the babies in the neighborhood, but as she talked all the time she knitted. She never knew how many stitches she had started the first pair with, so they were inevitably of different sizes, a difficulty she conquered by hoarding them all, and then sorting them into large, medium, and small. The large she put aside for Deborah, attaching such generous bows to them that Lily's had to have merely rosettes. In this way she expressed her sympathy. She was also very busy at present, doing up the cradle with pink glazed calico and muslin. This was kept locked in the attic. She finished off a small boot, sewed the bow on, and looked up as John opened the door. "Where's Deb?" he asked anxiously. "How'd I know when I never set eyes on my own child from sun-up to sundown, with you 'ticing her off in the bitter cold to get her Jeff?" replied his wife. "I thought she was in an hour ago. I missed her." The two old people gazed at each other with growing anxiety. Unspoken fears were in both their minds. "I'll go and bang the tray," said Mrs. Arden at last, taking refuge in practicality. "It dunna be no manner of use," said John. "If she's anywhere in the place she'll be in the buildings, and she'll answer when I call." But no answer came to his anxious, wistful calls, and he lit the lantern and went out again. Patty followed, struck silent by fear, and having the same air of dependence on him as all creatures had in trouble. As they turned disconsolate from the old threshing floor under its round roof to the stable and the loft over, a stumpy figure came through the gate. "What'n you lost?" he queried, his hoarse voice hoarser with the cold. "Money or sense? You'm none to spare o' neither." "We'n lost our Deb," said John, his voice trembling. "Oh, well, she'll come in at meal-time." Patty rushed at him and administered a stinging box on the ear. I'll learn you, you callous little nut without a kernel, she cried, beside herself with anxiety. Now, now, Patty, said John. Eli was amused, surprisingly and pleasantly. Anyone who braved him amused him and gave him a pleasurable thrill, and human emotion, especially the emotion of love, which led people into such incalculable doings, amused him as much as anything had power to do. He therefore received the box on the ear with more blandness than he ever showed when people were pacific. "I'll look along of you," he said, "and then you can give me a drop of your sheep oil, John, for I've got none." He found it convenient never to have any of these things, drawing his supplies from John. "And you looked up the rick, up the ladder?" he asked. "Well, of all softness," said Patty. "It's where I'd go if I wanted to be out of the clickety-clack of a tongue like a old wind-pump, never still day nor night." John climbed the ladder slowly, his lantern in one hand. Halfway up he stopped. "Mother, you go and put the kettle on," he said, "in case she'm bad and wants tea and that." Patty obediently trotted off. "Eli," said John, "you can go and help yourself to that oil." Eli seized an opportunity that he did not often get. John went up on the ladder, having succeeded in his object, to be alone if he found Deborah. The top of the stack, under its corrugated iron roof, was dark. John turned the lantern light on it. There was something dark at the end of the stack. He groped his way along. "Deb," he said. She sat crouched, white, silent. In her hands, blue with cold, were Whitefoot's reins. "Deb," he said, "Deb, my dear." In his voice were all the low notes of tenderness. He put his arm round her and warmed one of her cold hands between his, talking softly of small things in tones of infinite love. He sometimes talked to the sad-eyed ewes and young lambs in tones like these, and they would look lovingly at him, understanding what he meant, though not what he said. Deborah looked at him now, across leagues of thought, out of a far country of despair. "What ails you, Deb, dear heart?" he asked. "Tell your old dad what ails you." She looked at him dumbly. "See, Deb, my pretty," he went on winningly, "Mother and me, we've been fair crazy with sorrow, looking you in every place, and the cold catches Mother summat cruel. When you come in now? I'm cold too," he added artfully. "Aye, it's cold, cold as death," said Deborah. Her words were shaken with her long shivers. "There's no need to talk of death," said John. "We'm well and hearty, thank God." "It came on me," said Deborah, looking at him with horror in her eyes, "sudden like, when you went for the cows, as Stephen—" She stopped. "Yes, my dear?" "As Stephen met me dead," she went on in an expressionless voice. "Dead and lonesome. It came on me as he met me, and though he didna love me, nor yet didna want me in the full of life, he met me lonesome and wanting me if he was low in the cold grave, wanting me and me not there." I see, Deb," said John. "Well?" "And so," said Deborah, "it seemed to me as I might go to him if he was dead, though I couldna live with him in life, for he didna love me and wouldn't want me, and so I fetched the reins." "Aye." "And come up here and—" There, said John. "Dinna go on, lass. I'd sooner you didna." He was sick with horror and suffering for her sorrow. He knelt by her on the hay, searching for comfort to give her, staring out at the black sky. As he gazed, a line of light came up over the little wood, and the moon rose majestic, leisurely, changing the massed clouds to ingots of silver and the high cirrus to an ivory filigree. The house and shippen sprang into being, bright-roofed, black-shadowed. A cock crowed, and the sound came through the clear air with the peculiar sweet pathos it has at night. John knelt, tranced, his eyes on the moonrise, his soul caught into one of its visionary moments. "Deb," he said, in a voice quite different from his usual one, "he inna dead. He may be in sore trouble, but he inna dead." She looked at him with the penetrating look of the stricken, and knew that it was not just a facile phrase to comfort her. She was convinced, as she could have been by nothing else. "How do you know?" she whispered. "I know," said John, as whimbrels know the way to the upper pastures and frogs the way to a far pond. It came o'er me like it does now and again, quick as lightning and quiet as an owl." From the house came the voices of Paddy and Eli, raised in altercation, for Paddy had seen in the bright moonlight how generously Eli was helping himself. "He ain't dead," John repeated pleadingly. "He might come back at long last." "It wouldna be any use. He dunna love me." "But he might be ill and want nursing." "Aye, he might," said Deborah reflectively. "He'd want you then," John went on persuasively and wistfully. "Only for a while." "Aye, maybe, but you'll not like him to be asking for you to nurse him and you not there." Deborah got up stiffly and with difficulty, for she was half frozen. She stood up in the white moonlight and stretched her arms westward. "I want him," she said with a controlled passion that shook her. "I want him as is the world and all to me, and I canna find him." "I sought him whom my soul loveth. I sought him, and I found him not," said John, quoting the beautiful words with the tender cadence he kept for such things. "It was but a little time, but I found him whom my soul loveth. I held him and would not let him go." The words fell like April rain on her seared heart. I could find him out of the world, and keep him in the face of death and hell," said Deborah, "if he'd lief be found and kept, but he'd liefer not." "We must live in good be hope," said John, "and we'll talk a bit of him now and again. You and me, Deb, what a fine chap he is and all, and how hard he worked and how they miss him. And now we'll come in to poor mother, as is that anxious." "She's scolding Eli," said Deborah, with the lambent humour that came to her in tragic moments. "She dunna want me. There's none wants me, only you, father," she went on, and broke into bitter weeping. "But I want you so bad," said John, "that there inna no sun, moon, nor stars without you, my lass. So you'll come home with me now, winna you, Deb, and let mother tuck you warm in bed, and I'll kindle a bit of fire in your room and light the lamp, and we'll talk about Stephen." So he persuaded her in homely phrases that breathed a godlike love. They got down the ladder with difficulty. She was so numb with cold and grief. Paddy heard them coming over the frozen yard and ran out. She had conquered her fears by preparing for Deborah's return, and had kept her thoughts off dread possibilities by scolding Eli. "Listen what I'm going to tell you," said Eli, who was almost bland and had decided to go before John found out how much oil he had taken. "You'm a passel of fools, but you keep a plenty of things, I'll say that for you, and it'll bring you to the house." Chapter 50. Mid-March came with a week of spring weather. The hoar-frost slipped from the brilliant pointed lilac buds and the stout brown chestnut buds as soon as the sun was up. After tea in the fresh vivid fields, blackbirds sang in the clear evening light, and through the mild darkness afterwards the lambs cried. "The days be drawing out," said John, coming in with a primrose for Deborah. "Too long they be," said Deborah. John looked at her worn face and came to a decision long pending. "I'm going to market Saturday, mother," he said. "Market? With one cow dry and the other near it, and the garden stuff done, and eggs as scarce as charity till not a hen can look me in the face? What in the name of softness for?" "Oh, 3 things I want." On Saturday, John called at the office of the County Weekly and asked for the editor. "Engaged," said the boy. John sat down, took out his New Testament, and put on his spectacles. In due time the editor appeared, and John, dreamy from his favourite passage in Revelation, pulled out a sheet of paper. "Will you please to read it, sir?" he said. "If Mr. Stephen Southernwood will write to this office, he will hear something to his advantage and oblige." "Yes, that's quite clear." "You think it'll fetch him, sir, or had I best explain a bit?" "It sounds inviting," said the editor. "Money, I suppose?" "Well, no." "Land left?" "No." "What then, if I might ask?" "A little and soon," said John, as if that were the best that could befall any man. "Good Lord," said the editor, who had 6 children. "No, don't explain if you want him." And it'll find him, certain sure? Asked John, looking at the editor over his spectacles. In America? The editor struggled between truth and the credit of his paper. Well, he said, of course America's a big place, and although we've a large circulation, he might not see it. Why not try a cable, if you know his address? I dunna, said John. I mun try a different sort of cable. Eh? A bit of a prayer. When John got home, Mrs. Arden was throwing hay to the sheep. And I hope you've done gallivanting for a bit, she said, for I canna do all. There's Deb slaving day in, day out to stop thinking, and Lily as winna do a hand's turn, and me up and down between 'em like a bird in a cage. If I go down and get Lily to take an airing, when I come back there's Deb scrub both the floors. And you off to town as if you weren't going to be 2 grandfathers in a month. And never a thank you from Lily. And there's Deb worth 6 of her, and met be a widow for all the good that Stephen is to her. Well, we mun do our best, mother. Hark at him! We mun do our best, and him going off and enjoying himself. It's long work and short words as gets through trouble, not them as stand and blat like lambs. Within, Deborah sat in the fading light, weary after too hard a day. She always exhausted herself in an instinctive desire for mental torpor. There was no light of coming motherhood in her eyes. She was not interested in her child. If she ever thought of it, she felt intense pity for it. For the rest, her thoughts followed Stephen, and she had none to spare for herself. She had no eyes for the things round her. The devil's chair stirred no fear in her. The flockmaster's signpost gave her no comfort, except that she remembered her dream of him with Stephen's face. The ordeal before her brought no terror, the future no curiosity. She was like one asphyxiated. For if the thing that is the spirit's breath of life is taken away, its life stops. All that she did was mechanical. Because she was strong, she fought her thoughts by work. Because she was naturally unselfish, she made clothes for Lily's child as well as her own. Lily took full advantage of this. She did not feel sorry for Deborah. She was so sorry for herself. Hers was not one of the natures from which sorrow strikes out a vast pity for all the world. John looked at Deborah, tragic in her white silence. He thought of what he had done and rubbed his hands in childlike joy, never doubting that he would have a speedy reply. "If you must rub 'em with the soap in 'em, and get washed, for goodness sake," said Patty, "and have your meat, for it's as late as good luck." "Maybe I'll bring good luck," said John, through suds from the wash-house. "Maybe you'll do a lot, but if I didn't poke you and prod you, you'd go to sleep standing like Whitefoot in the shafts. Now, Deb, my dear, draw up to your tea," she went on, with a drop of 3 notes in her voice and a tenderness that none but the sick ever heard from her. "A bit of thin bread and butter, now." "Anything, thank you, Mother," said Deborah, as she always did. "That's a good girl. I only wish Lily'd say the same. So frangy as she is, and my cooking's too rough, seemingly, though she cannot cook herself, not if it's ever so. There she sits snivelling in the armchair, eating sugar till she feels sick, and then refusing good food, and Joe having to go down on his knees, as clumsy as a load of coals, and feed her by spoonfuls, and him looking at me, as had done a morning's washing for her, as if I was a black convict criminal. Only saints have the patience as she calls for, and I'm not a saint, thank God." Outside in the dusk a thrush sang with poignant sweetness, possessing the silent pastures with its fresh voice. John listened, his spoon arrested in stirring, the music plucking at him like a hand on a harp. He listened so long while the song slipped into the clear, primrose west that Mrs. Arden was irritated. "What's eggs?" she rapped out. "Eggs?" "Yes, don't you know what EGG is? What be they now?" "I didna ask." "And butter?" "I didna ask." "Well, of all the—" Words failed her. She put her feelings into cutting bread. John said nothing. He was accustomed to silence, for in success or failure the seer knows the impossibility of explaining himself. "Can you loan me a few turmits?" said Eli's voice at the door. "My sheep's finished theirs, greedy beasts." "You didna put in enough," said John. "I was afraid you'd be short." "He wanted to be short," cried Patty with perspicacity. "You've never asked after Lily yet, Eli." "Why should I? Spent breath's gone and wasted." "You unnatural, grudging little bantam." "If you was my wife, If I'd been so crack-brained as to be any such thing, I'd maybe ended by making you summat like a man, working overtime at you." "Best come for the turmits, Eli," said John. "Taking the turmits out of our very mouths," said Patty wrathfully, "and you soft enough to give 'em." "Give, and it shall be given to you, mother." "Not in this life." Patty spoke with the skepticism of those who toil for their daily needs. "And in the next we might not want turmits." She turned and surprised Deborah, silently crying. She was much concerned. With her, visible grief meant much, hidden grief little. She suddenly realized how Deborah had been feeling all this time. She shyly stroked her arm. "He'll be sure to come soon," she said. "Never no more. Besides, away or not away is no different now. He dunna care about me." Mrs. Arden gave it up. "I canna make Deb out," she said to John later. "Cut love's hard to mend, mother, but if so be he'd come back, there met be things to be said for him as we dunna know." "If so be he'd come back," said Mrs. Arden, "and I could get my tongue round him real proper, I could say, 'Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace.'" End of chapter 50.
Chapter 51 to 53 of The Golden Arrow by Mary Webb. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Anne Erickson, Toronto. Chapter 51. It was early June, and Deborah was out of doors again, taking slow walks with her baby in her arms. On the green, lonely hills the sheep grazed with their lambs, and the air was never empty of their sweet, sad calling. In the warm plain the May hedges were already in flower, and the thorn trees that clustered by the valley streams like wide-skirted children, or climbed the steep hillsides, were opening their hard green buds and breaking softly into white. Looking at them, Deborah remembered how she had said to Stephen, "The thorn blows late." Once more the bracken pushed out soft fingers, and cuckoos cried from orchards at the foot of the coombes. The snipe summoned his love from his airy circles, and curlews ran along the hilltops with their forlorn elfin music. "The safety tree's gold over," cried Mrs. Arden one day when the little family came back from sleep, where the baby had been christened. She plucked a spray for Deborah and another for Lily, who had come up for the christening party. Lily had insisted on calling her boy Stephen, to Joe's great bepuzzlement. Deborah would not call her child by its father's name. She blazed into hostility at the suggestion. The very idea made her almost regard her own child as an interloper. "None shall be called by my man's given name," she said. "I'd be minding me nights when I called the lad home of the days that's gone, the shiny days, and the ways of him as I call home never no more. And when it was only the lad that came and not my Stephen, I'd come nigh to hating the poor child." So he was called John. After tea, Deborah went with her baby along the bright ribbon of turf that led through the heather to the shepherd's signpost. She found Lily's presence irksome. Lily was so untroubled, so approved of, so cold. Deborah did not know that her sense of injustice was the age-long feud between storm-tossed greatness and sheltered littleness. Low on the opposite ridge, the larch-woods still kept their breathless May freshness, reaching up wistfully toward the gaunt, unchanging heights and the Devil's Chair. Among them the fir trees reared their tarnished blue-green, sullen, archaic sentinels of death in a world of immaculate, indomitable youth. A soft, strong wind blew from the west, quick with the year's promise, brimful of meadow and mountain scent. Large clouds continually came up from beyond the chair, darkened it, swept over the valley, and suddenly disappeared like conjured ghosts as the warm air struck them. Deborah sat down beneath the signpost, exhausted with a weariness that even the tiny shell-pink fingers, so determinedly fastened on her thumb, could not lift. She looked down at the golden spray of laburnum on her breast, drew in its curious sharp scent, and began to sing in a low voice. "Some were sobbing in the gloom when we found it, when we found the golden arrow, wand of willow in the secret comb." She looked across at the Devil's Chair, dark and shining as a night sapphire. It seemed to her that there was no hostility now between the two ranges, between the towering throne and the small white cross. Always before she had superstitiously regarded the chair as wholly evil, the flockmaster's signpost as wholly good. Now she saw good and evil mingled, and felt a slumbering terror in the protecting cross, a hidden beneficence in the inimical stronghold across the valley. Beyond both, behind light and shadow, under pain and joy, she felt a presence, too intangible for materialization into words, too mighty to be expressed by any name of man's. Intuitively she looked at the dogmas she had been taught, and in the fierce light that her experience had lit in her, she found them wanting. She had nothing definite to put in their place, only a conception as vague and volatile as light or scent, and without the anesthetic quality of those creeds that affirm God to be love and goodness only. She was naturally religious, and she felt an almost mystical comfort and rapture in the peace of the flockmaster's green pastures, and in the presence that dwelt there for her as well as for her father. But away in the black night, among the tomb-like rocks, in the glare of her burnt happiness, she had heard devils laugh, had felt a dark power brood on the crag. Instinct told her that the two visions were one. She was content with the balance of life as she found it, being dimly aware that the terror and the beauty intermingled in something that was more wonderful than beauty. "The thorn blows late," she murmured, with the patience of one that has come through tumult and found peace. She thought how Stephen had failed her. Then, quick as light on water, came the remembrance of her dream, when Stephen appeared to her as the flockmaster, holding in his glance infinite, godlike love and pity. She looked down at her child. Life had given her this gift, for which she had not asked, denying her the gift she desired. Yet, bent above the sleeping face, clear and sweet as a pale-tinted wild rose, she acquiesced, though sorrowfully, in the decree. She had love to give still, in large measure, and here was one of love's little beggars. She gazed into the distance while the slow, honeyed loveliness of evening intensified toward its climax. Above the blue ranges rose bluer mountains of cloud. Against this background the swallows, yet more brilliantly blue, darted with the half-gay, half-panic-struck frenzy of creatures aware of their endless capacity for joy, and of the tragic brevity of their day. With such wild, despairing haste do natures like Stephen's seize the gleaming moment. The devil's chair had a light behind it from the setting sun. Rays came from it as if it had a heart of warmth. Suddenly, in the grave silence of all things at sundown, Deborah turned sharply as if at a cry. Chapter 52. Nothing had stirred, but far away from the direction of Wood's End, a man appeared walking with the difficult haste of one eager but exhausted. Deborah put the child down and stood up. Stephen came on, dragging after him a gigantic shadow. Deborah stood waiting, numb, joyless, since for her the meaning had been struck from all meetings. The shadow of the cross barred her dress. Stephen said nothing. He looked at her with a dumb, haggard gaze that had nothing of his old self in it. New lines were in his face, lines too deep to be accounted for by physical suffering alone. He was gaunt. Strangers would have considered before they spoke of him as a young man. His lip trembled. He sat down on the mound at the foot of the signpost and looked up at her, absorbed, silent. "You'm tired, lad," she said with quick concern. "Not now. I was, but now I'm home." In the last sentence, with its wild, pathetic rapture, were reflected all his forlorn days of absence, for the intensity of present joy is the gauge of past grief. His "I'm home," by its triumphant security, told that he had been in hell. In his voice were the tones of the world's homesickness, the nightmares of children in the dark, the blind groping of lover for lover, the sob of humanity cast out of Eden. But Deborah did not understand. Too much pain had left her bewildered. She only felt, in a dim way, the pitiful irony of his words, since she was his home no more. "You look as if you might have been poorly, lad," she said practically. "Yes, I had typhoid. I was in hospital for months. That was why I didn't come. And the minute I knew I couldn't come, I wanted to more than anything in this life or any other. I was off my head for a long time. I couldn't remember anything except your name. It was awful. I couldn't get to you, and I couldn't live without you." "Poor lad," You always like to do things sudden-like." She had not understood. He became aware of the change in her. Terror flashed into his face. "Deborah," he said, standing up. "Deborah, I want to kiss you." "You'd liefer not, I know," she answered. "It's only for my sake. Thank you kindly all the same, Stephen." "Liefer not?" "Aye. But I've come half across the world for it." He did not mention that he had worked his way home on a tramp steamer, sick and ill and scarcely convalescent. He did not mention a score of things that might have aroused her. Trouble that happened to himself had ceased to be worth either mention or thought in his estimation. "Aye," said Deborah, "but first you went." "I know, good God, I know. Was any man ever such a blind fool? But I felt then that going was the only way to keep sane. These ranges, they got hold of me." He faltered. By the new light in him, he saw how meaningless his reasons must appear to her. He knew that now neither the wilderness, nor dark weather, devils, nor the infinite void mattered to him in the least. His love for Deborah made him impregnable to terror, gave him a grasp of truth deeper than reason. He had found the golden arrow to his own agony and ennobling. "There's no ill will, lad," Deborah went on in the toneless voice that was natural to her now. She was anxious that he should not reproach himself, for a moment's pain for him was more than she could bear. "I understand all about it," she went on, sitting down and laying a motherly hand on his hair as he flung himself at her feet. "Aye, all about it. You thought, as folk will, as you love me best in the world, and then you came to see it different. I didn't know, I didn't understand, but now I do. I love you. Oh, what's the good of words? You can see." "See what, Stephen?" "That I love you better than myself." "You was used to say that," said Deborah with terrible unintentional cruelty. "But you did not." "But I do now. I do now. How can I show you? Can't you believe it, Deborah, my darling?" "Never no more." Suddenly, in her eyes, her emotionless lips, he learnt the agony she had endured. He covered his face with his hands. Hard sobs shook him. "There, there," she said, patting his shoulder. "Dinna take on, lad. There's no to miss." He groped for her hand. "Poor child," he said brokenly. Deborah, a year ago, would have known from the very simplicity of his words and their selflessness in the midst of his own misery that he loved her now, if never before. Today she did not know. She was a woman of one fixed idea, that he did not want her, so he must not be allowed to sacrifice himself out of kindness. "There, there," she comforted him. "It's nowt." "I'm like a man that kills himself in his sleep," he muttered. "Tell me about it, that night." "The longest night," she said, like a child repeating a well-learnt lesson. "Don't, don't," he cried, flinching. But she was back by the devil's chair in a horror of darkness, and she had forgotten him. "The devil's laughed down the spinney and called me a keptoman, and so I was, ring or no ring, for there's nowt can hallow a man and a woman as lives together if they dinna love each other, and if they canna bear to be apart, and if they can do without the little ways each of other." She paused. "Oh, well," she ended with a hint of cold pride. "Then the woman's a keptoman and the child's base born." "The child?" Stephen questioned. He had not noticed the white bundle, frail as the cotton grass, down that wandered from hill to hill, a poor white waif blown along the steep, dark mountains. "Aye, Stephen, your child." She was suddenly anxious that he should enjoy to the full the pride of fatherhood, the joy she had wanted for him. She took the child up and parted the shawl. "There," she said, "the only thing I've ever done for you, Stephen." She sat with the child on her knee. He knelt and examined it, anxious not to hurt her by any seeming indifference, but thinking only of her. The sun had gone. From the thickets of color in the west, as from an orchard of ripe falling fruit, the red and yellow softly passed. In the subdued light, the little group was like an austerely imagined Holy Family. "It's very," said Stephen gropingly, "very small, isn't it? And a bit broad for its length?" The child began to cry, frightened by the tear that fell on its face as Stephen bent over. "All that, too," he muttered, and shook his head in a kind of helplessness. "All that pain for me." "He's only broad because of his wraps," said Deborah, kindly explanatory. "And he's big for his age," she added, quoting her mother with detachment. The baby cried louder. He was hungry and had inherited from his father the axiom, "Here and now." "I mun take him home and give him his supper," said Deborah. "What does it have?" asked Stephen, catching at trifles in the desperate way of those in a great crisis. "He's breastfed," said Deborah. "Then need you—" began Stephen, striving to keep her with him. "I mean, can't it be fed here?" "No." In her proud, aloof glance he read the death sentence of his hopes. He was a stranger. He looked round him like a man lost on the ranges in a snowstorm. "I'd better go," he said. "It's all I can do. You hate the sight of me. I don't wonder." "You know I love only you out of the world, Stephen." "Well, then," he cried with a rush of joy, "can't you believe that I do? How can I make you believe?" "You canna. You told me you did afore, and you didna. I canna believe anything again." "Deborah, live with me once more, just for 1 week, 1 day, at home yonder above Lost Withen. You'll understand then," he cried frantically. "You'll know without telling when you see how I'll take care of you." "They're in a no home there now, for I burnt the things, and the cattle go to and again by the hearth, and there's none to stay the wind and the rain driving in o'er the threshold." "I'll make a new home. I can." He flung his head back with his old unconquerable look. "Thank you kindly, Stephen, but I'm well enough as I be. It's only your good-heartedness, I know. But I dunna need to be beholden to anyone." "But it's I that would be beholden, Deborah. I'm asking it as a favor, the greatest in the world." "Afore, when you asked, I gave you all I had, such as it was, and you flung it back in my face. I've no ill feeling, Stephen, only I've no more to give." Stephen stood up. On his face, as he looked down at her, was the lambent beauty of those who find the golden arrow and clasp it to their hurt and glory. His face was the face of her dream. In the dusk, tall and deep-eyed beside the little signpost, he was the incarnation of the flock-master. Worn, world-battered, despairing, he stood there in a grandeur that had not been his before, the splendor of perfect manhood. All the passions of his eager nature were quelled before this new burning force in him. All his old readiness of tongue, his old poses were gone. He felt nothing of his own tragic beauty as he said gently, "The dew's falling, Deb. You two should be home. Good night." "Good night, Stephen," said Deborah, not realizing the parting any more than the meeting, "and may the kindly light be along with you." From the coombes rose white rays of mist, slipping along the hillsides, ascending, torn by the sharp buttresses of the rocks, touching the hills to a strange, grieved beauty. From the westward side, 2 of these rays came slowly, detaching themselves with soft determination from the physical world of rock and tree, and sweeping high over the plateau on the wind, like spirits too delicate and too eager for the limitations of a material world. They faded in the dusk. At last Stephen turned and went a few steps in the direction from which he had come. He looked back, and she waved her hand, and then she also turned to go. As soon as he was out of sight, all power of movement left Deborah. There was no room in her mind for anything but the sense that her fingers had touched his hair, and now did not touch it. Slowly, as life comes back to a paralyzed limb, she awoke to the knowledge that he had been here and was gone. What did it matter whether he loved her or not, whether she was a kept woman or not, whether he left her again some day? She wanted him. Everything else was washed from her brain by this primeval, ungovernable passion for the reassurance of touch. She hastily put the child in the heather, though it was wet with dew. Even motherhood was swept away. She ran along the path, calling, "Stephen! Stephen!" But no voice answered. Around her were only the inscrutable hills, the night sky, intolerably secret, remote, vast. The child wailed, and its cry pierced the solitudes like the eternal lament of humanity with its limitless desires, its weak small hands. Away at High Lizos a little light moved in widening arcs, as John searched for Deborah, coming slowly nearer in a small aura of warmth along the hill in the cold gloom. But Deborah gazed away into the vague night, for she knew that somewhere in the huge folds of the hills a light was passing from her, a light which shone, now that it had ceased to flicker, with a large glory even more beautiful than her father's. It had smitten her new-found quiescence and destroyed it, wakening her to life. It could, she knew, circle her in from all uproar, all grief and gloom, though she dwelt in the starless combs of pain and death. Chapter 53. In the rosy kitchen at High Lizo's, Deborah and her mother sat by the fire, tensely silent. John had taken the octagonal lantern and was away on the hills. "If he's to be found by mortal man, father'll find him for certain sure. So ease your heart, Deb, my dear," said Mrs. Arden. "Winna you put on that gown with the poppy sprig?" "No, I'll take nowt for granted," Deborah replied. Like all who have lived with sorrow and looked below the surface of life, she had a shivering sense of its irony. She sprang up, the child in her arms, and sank into her chair, half fainting, when she saw that only Eli stood at the door. He had come to borrow the sheep shears, having broken his own. "What a time of night! Borrowing's allus in season, seemingly," scolded Mrs. Arden. "You'll go round in your bones to borrow your coffin, Eli. Now, as you be here, you may as well look what a fine boy Deb's got." Eli advanced upon Deborah and stood grimly contemplating the baby. "Well?" queried Mrs. Arden, thirsty for admiration from however unpromising a quarter. But Eli was lost in frowning study of the child, which was met by a composed blue gaze, fearless, eager, wilful as Stephen's. Suddenly Eli leant forward and shook his fist at the child. "Where's my Bible?" he shouted. Deborah stiffened. Through the uncurtained window she had seen, very far away, a small light. While it was only a point in the darkness, there was a sound outside of a man running. They all listened. In the breathless quiet, the footsteps acquired a strange significance. It was as if humanity ran blindly down the steep, hastening with unquenchable longing towards some mystery that the night cradled. Stephen stood in the doorway. He came in. Mrs. Arden tiptoed through the door and went down the path. Stephen looked at Eli. "Get out," he said. And Eli, in an unaccountable, odd silence, went. Stephen shut the door. "Well," said Eli, stealthily ungluing himself from the window and startling Patty nearly out of her wits, "if the young fool wants to go down on the floor like a struck bullock, why canna he go down to the Lord Almighty and not to an woman as is naught but his wife, when all's said?" He slammed the gate after him. "If he was my son," he said, and faded in the dim, soft night. John came up. "The lad outstripped me, mother," he explained. "I'm thinking it's the shipping for you and me tonight, while Cut loves mending." They sat on the straw in an aura of light from the lantern. "Shanna I kindle a bit of fire for him and light the lamp?" asked Patty. "There's no need, mother. Do you mind the tale of them that found the golden arrow, and went with apple blow scent round 'em, and a more to bees and warmship, and wanted nowt of any man? There's no need of fire or candle for them, my dear, for they'm got their light, the kindly light, and the thorns white over." End of chapter 53. End of The Golden Arrow by Mary Webb.